Gracious God, we thank you for this day, this glorious weather, and we lift up challengers who are undergoing health issues. We lift up people who are victims of wars in Ukraine and Palestine, Israel, Gaza. We'd ask that you send your Spirit to be with them, to nurture them and counsel them. We also ask that you send your Spirit to this classroom to strengthen us and challenge us to do your work here in our community and help in the rest of the world. Help us to love one another and help us to live and love like Jesus. Amen. Okay, and Hank.
Thank you, Kenyon. I want one announcement real quick, just to make you aware. Bud is sitting in the back, and he is the church guy that helps around here and makes things happen. Anybody want to look at the new carpet, because we now have all of the tar stains gone. So Bud was responsible for getting the tiles. Thank you, Bud. I am filling in for Kathy this morning. Kathy is a member of the education team and is the one that worked hard to get Diana scheduled to come. She's recovering from a bad case of bronchitis, and this is her third week of it, so it's been a tough go. But she's getting better and is healing. This morning we have with us Diana Booren. Diana is the moderator of the church. For those of you that may or may not know what the moderator is, she may tell you, I don't know, maybe I'm saying something ahead of time, but years ago, and I look out through this audience and I see a few who were president of the board. That was the old term. And when I was president of the board, there was a board of directors. And that board of directors was selected somehow, I don't really remember how. But then the term changed. It became moderator. And that is more in keeping with the disciples, I guess, churches around the country, and our moderator and a vice moderator. We also have what's called an MLT, Ministry Leadership Team, and that Ministry Leadership Team is composed of various department heads or chairs of certain committees and so forth, and that is the group of, how many, Diana? 15? 12. 12 people that really govern our church on a day-to-day basis, and really on a monthly basis. The day-to-day basis is the ELT, or Executive Leadership Team, which is composed of the moderator, the vice moderator, the secretary, and the treasurer, and our senior pastor. Those are the executive leadership team that run the day-to-day. I will tell you something about Diana here. She was a undergraduate degree, was in marketing, and she received her master's in divinity from the Lutheran Seminary in Philadelphia. She served in several roles in youth and children's ministry throughout college and seminary before serving as a pastor in Louisiana for several years. She and her husband, Scott, who, by the way, some of you may or may not know, is the chief financial officer at Southern Hills. They moved to Tulsa in 2015 with their one-year-old daughter, Kara. She was then, she served as communication director for Mainsprings, a Tulsa-based nonprofit serving people in Tanzania from 2015 to 2021. Diana now stays at home with her 3 kids, Kara 9, Connor 6, and Caleb 2, and volunteers at school activities. I think this is a little bit of a misnomer when she says she stays at home. Scott, her husband, goes to work every morning, and Diana stays with the kids and helps out with school. Scott gets home from work. Diana packs up her bag, and she comes to church and starts her committee meetings. So she is an unpaid employee of the church, in my opinion. I have worked with Diana on several committees, which we both served. I was on the vision team with her. I've found a newfound respect for her and her intelligence and her organization. I also served with her on the finance team, and she is in attendance at our endowment meetings on a quarterly basis. She's a really smart lady and has a lot of experience, especially in church organization, and I'd like to introduce Diana Booren.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be here again with the Challengers. I feel like it's been a while, but I'm glad to be back today. As Hank said, I'm Diana Booren. This is my family, just in case you have seen us around. So Scott and our 3 kids. And Hank kind of did a little bit of the introduction I was going to do, but it's recently come to my attention that with so many new people here at Harvard Avenue and people coming from different churches, that governance is different in every church. And so I'll give a recap of kind of what Hank did, but this is also known as Why Am I Standing in Front of You Today? So as Hank said, I'm the moderator and part of the executive leadership team. Those are the other officers up there. So we have Kyle Simmons, who's our vice moderator, Allison Haney is our treasurer, and Susan Hollingsworth is the secretary. That's all part of the ministry leadership team. And as Hank said, that's the board that meets about every other month. We work closely with David and Kevin, who then work with the staff. There are 2 elders who serve on the ministry leadership team, which is what you'd call our board. And so they liaison with the rest of the elders. And of course, all these people are elected from the congregation, and we'll chat about that a little bit later. But I wanted to come here today to just give you some updates about what we've been working on this year, both things that you have probably seen and some behind-the-scenes things, but also kind of where we stand as a church and where does that place us in the bigger realm of capital C church? How are we measuring up in terms of some of the trends that we see beyond our walls? So 2023 has been a busy year here at Harvard Avenue. There's lots of great things going on. As you may be aware, we've welcomed lots of new members, about 75 new members this year, which over the last 2 years, we're close to 200 new members just in the last 2 years alone. Finances continue to be strong. We're ahead of budget this year. Our endowment is growing very quickly. To me, it seems like. Hank maybe doesn't feel like it's enough, but it seems like it's going really well. And then also we've had some surprises this year. We've lost some staff people suddenly, and that's been hard to kind of pivot and have different people take on different roles in some new ways. And we'll talk about that again a little bit later. But I also want to look beyond our walls a little bit, because while things are going overall very well here at HAC, I want to look, where does that place us in the bigger picture? And so we're going to look at a few cultural trends that we need to pay attention to within our denomination, church attendance in general in the United States, and some generational trends too. I show you this not to be depressing, but just to be realistic. So this is Disciples of Christ attendance from 1967 to 2000. Goes to 2017. This is actually membership, not attendance. So you can see that trend line, 2017 to 2023. I don't have on the graph, but I'm sorry to say the line hasn't appreciably changed there. David said this, and I'm going to say it again just because I think it's really a poignant example. So there are more people who attend an Alabama football game on a weekend than attend Disciples of Christ churches on a Sunday morning right now. And I say that because I think we need to be really aware of what's happening in our country in terms of these trends. And I think there's some reasons why we are maybe an exception right now, but I think to pretend like this is not happening and that we're insulated from that would be foolish. We're in good company. So these are mainline denominations. I'll use my little pointer here. Okay, so this is American Baptist Church. You can see the line there. This is Assemblies. These are other mainline Protestant denominations. Assemblies of God is actually growing. This is the Evangelical Lutheran Church. This is Presbyterian Church of America, which is also growing, but it's important to remember that it's a very, very small denomination, only about 200, maybe 300,000 members now in general. This is Presbyterian Church USA. This is the Southern Baptist Convention, which has a little bit different shift. This goes to 2022. It hasn't been a good year for the Southern Baptist Convention, so I would imagine that's going to continue to go down. This is the Episcopal Church. This is United Church of Christ, and this is the United Methodist Church. I promise we won't be so depressing the whole time. I thought this was interesting. This shows you those same denominations. The red line is if they had kept pace with population growth in the United States. So if they had kept kind of their same percentage over that window of time. where would they be in terms of membership? The blue line shows where they actually are. Okay, I want to share, this is from Gallup, who does a lot of research about church attendance. And what they found, this was about a year ago, that 31% of people report attending some kind of church, synagogue, or mosque weekly or almost weekly. 31% of people in the United States. But 67% say that they attended weekly or almost weekly growing up. So this is what I want to show you. We're going to say there's 3 generations, okay? So let's say this is me, okay? This would be my parents. This would be my grandparents. So 51% of people in, let's call it my grandparents' generation, attended every week, plus another 16 who attended almost every week. Now look down one generation. It's almost the same. There was almost no change in terms of church attendance from my grandparents' generation to my parents' generation. Now, I want you to look here. Let's call this my generation. It has dropped in half in one generation. This is the steepest decline we've ever seen in church attendance in this country, in the history of the country. And I say that not because I'm pessimistic, because I'm not, but to say that our mission field is dramatically different than it was even one generation ago. We are not operating in the same world that we were. Okay, so of those who attended every week growing up, so let's say that was me, I attended almost every week growing up, 38% of those people say that they still attend almost every week. But more than half of the people who attended church every week or almost every week growing up say that they almost never attend church now. So it's not that it's just decline that I only attend twice a month or once a month. Half of the people don't attend at all. Okay, this is one more interesting fact here. So these are people who say that they're not religious, who answered this study. And the question was, how interested might you be in exploring some kind of religious participation? 3% said they would be very interested. 75% said not interested at all. Okay, so that's the trends in the country. And then we have Harvard Avenue, which is currently bucking those trends in pretty big ways. Our finances are strong, we're growing, we're seeing a lot of really positive indicators. So why do we think that is? Well, this is not scientific, this is just my own thoughts. So I think that this church has historically had just really strong leadership, really strong vision across the life of the congregation, and I think that's put us in a great place. I think we've had forward-looking leaders who have been willing to sacrifice and who have been willing to make really great decisions for the future. We've also had really strong finances. We continue to have really strong finances at a time when many churches are really struggling there. I think also we haven't been consumed by some of the divisive issues that other denominations have been. Not that they don't exist here, but it hasn't been a central focal point. I think that's been a strength. Strong traditional worship, I think, is a strength. And I think that we have provided a really soft landing place for a lot of people who have been part of other mainline denominations whose churches are maybe struggling or closed, or they just don't feel like that's a good fit anymore. And we've seen a lot of people come from other denominations. Most specifically, in the last 18 months from Methodism. We have a lot of people joining who are coming from Methodist churches. So, all those are great, but here's what I'll say. That pool of people transferring membership from one mainline denomination to our church is ultimately going to dry up. That's not an endless pool of people who are going to find their home here. Also, we're tracking kind of who is joining, and it's really 2 to 1, almost 3 to 1 new members who are over 65 versus those who are under 65. Now, I'm happy to have new members of any age who find this place their home. But there are certain realities that come with that, right? That if we only are attracting people who are over 65, that puts a lifespan on the future of this congregation. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about some generational things, because I think they really impact what we're doing here as a church and our strategy as we move toward the future. Now, obviously, generational theory is just that. It's a theory, and you can say that you're part of this generation and that doesn't fit you at all, and that's certainly true. These are generalizations, but I think they can be helpful. So Strauss and Howe did some work about 30 years ago and wrote a book called Generations, and what they posited was that each generation has a really specific personality. And the way that they looked at that, especially in the United States, was they identified this 4-generational cycle. So they kind of gave each generation an archetype and watched how that repeated every 4 generations from the beginning of the history in our country. There's one time where that did not hold, and it was during the Civil War, that kind of like jolted that cycle, and then it started over again. Here's what they said. They said the first generation is a prophet generation who are really speaking out for change. Then you have a nomad generation, you have a hero generation, and you have an artist generation. So I'm going to show you what they put these last 4 generations in. So they said the boomers were the prophet generation. The Gen X was the nomad generation. I think you can probably see that. The millennials were the hero generation. Despite all the talk of us millennials being snowflakes, there actually is a lot of research that's showing that millennials care very deeply about social good and how that they can make the world a better place. And then Gen Z, which is the up-and-coming, or some are calling it the iGen generation, is the artist generation. And I think that's really important as we look toward the future. So someone else who is James Chung, who's part of InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, he wanted to know if these generational archetypes influenced the way that you looked at your faith and looked at the gospel. And so he took that on as a study. And what he found was that each generation approached the gospel with a very different question. Now, of course, everyone has lots of questions when they look at their faith, but there was one key question that he called really the front door question. What is it that they want to know more than anything else? So here's these generations again. He said the boomers want to know what is true. You see C.S. Lewis being such an important part, lots of these apologetics growing alongside the boomer generation about how to defend your faith, how to understand your faith, things like that. The Gen X wanted to know what is real. They were looking for things that were authentic. Is this really impacting your life? Are you who you say you are? What does that mean? Then he said millennials are asking, what is good? Is this worth building my life around? Is this holding up to what it's supposed to actually be doing? And he says that Gen Z is asking, what is beautiful? Now, you can dismiss that and say, oh, they only care about what something looks like on the outside. They're not actually looking for what's underneath. But I don't think that's true. I think there are 2 pieces to this. I think, number 1, Gen Z is an incredibly visual generation, and we cannot forget that, right? They're the ones who gave up Facebook and moved to Instagram because they want the visual part of that. They want things to be beautiful. They're the artist generation, but it's not beauty just for the sake of an outward appearance. It's really what is worth their time and their energy, what is worth stopping in their tracks to look at. And that's really what they're seeking. So if we think of these generational questions, they should influence the way that we program, the way that we communicate within our church. So I said this to the elders a couple weeks ago. I feel like the strategy this year at Harvard Avenue was really about removing barriers, that we wanted this to be a place where people could come and easily find a home, find a place, feel welcome. And that's really what centered a lot of what we worked on this year. So I'm going to share some initiatives. A lot of these you probably know about. So we did a rebrand and a new website that hopefully has much more accurate information and is able to be kept up a little bit better. We've been working hard on our hospitality. We have a great team with Kathy Laptad and Denny Stewart, who have worked to reschedule all the greeters, who have worked to staff that desk outside. You've seen that the desk moved so that it's actually visible from most of the doors as you come in, the information desk. And we're working on staffing this desk down here. Lots of new greeters. I know my family loves to greet. My kids, it's one of their favorite Sundays when we're scheduled to greet that they get to open doors and say hello. So we're working hard on that. We're also working on signage. That's going to be coming a little bit more in the future, but we did receive a gift to help us add some more signage both on the outside of the building so people understand what door to come in, where they're trying to go, and on the inside of the building too. I know David tells the story of people who've walked right into the choir practice because they thought that was the main door to the sanctuary. So we want to avoid that. When somebody finally has the courage and the motivation to walk into church for the first time, we want it to be as seamless as we can possibly make it. We want them to feel welcomed. We don't want them walking into the choir room instead of the main door of the church. So that's still coming. We worked on Planning Center and the directory launch. So hopefully all of you have a new directory on your phone. If you don't, come see me after this, but it should be up and running. And on the back side of that you probably don't see is a new way to manage our calendar and how we schedule and how we communicate with people. And so that's the back end of that directory that the office gets to use to be more effective in getting information out. I know Hank has been working with his team on the endowment. You've probably heard him give some announcements in church. There was a meeting in August, and so we're continuing to develop that as well. And then a focus on family ministries, which I will get to next. But I just want to point out something. So some of those top things answer that question in some ways of getting them through the front door. Is this clear? Is this pleasing? Is this something that I am interested in stopping to look into more? Okay, family ministries. So I hope that you all know that we are looking for a family pastor right now, and I want to give you a little bit of information about why we're looking for that. So, who knows who is the biggest influence on a child's spiritual development? The parents. Who's the second biggest influence on a child's spiritual development? Grandparents. Did you know that? That's what studies are showing. The first is parents, the second is grandparents. Now, of course, if you live your life and never tell your grandkids that you love Jesus or anything like that, that's not going to be an influence. But you have this ability to be such a huge influence. And so this is not a new concept, this idea of a family pastor. This is not something we invented. You probably know of other churches that are structured this way. But this is something that came out of the vision process more than 18 months ago, was this idea of a paradigm shift so that we recognize who is really the ones who are having the primary impact on kids and how are we equipping them to pass on their faith effectively so that we don't have that generational drop like we've seen. And so if you think about it, let's say an average family goes to church 40 times a year maybe, because most families my age are not coming every Sunday. At best, they're coming 2 to 3 times a month. So if they go to children's ministry, they have 40 hours, right, that we have to teach them here in these walls. Over that same period of time in a year, it's shown that parents are with their children for about 3,000 hours. So that begs the question, where is really the time for effective faith formation? And it really starts in the home and with the family. And so the idea of a family pastor is someone who's going to come in and understand that paradigm in new ways. And so they're really supporting the parents and the grandparents and the adoptive grandparents and the aunts and uncles to come alongside those kids and pass on this faith that was so meaningful to you, to make sure that it's meaningful to this next generation as well. And so what I see in this role is someone who's going to really equip parents in new ways, help them to know what to do, because sometimes it's hard to have a sense of, I want my kids to have this faith, but what does that mean on a Monday morning when we're dropping them off for school? So giving some ideas like that. I hope that there are opportunities for grandparents to say, okay, school's about to start, it's August. What are 3 ways that you can support your grandkids and help pass on the faith? Or Christmas is coming, here's how you can be part of that. So there's lots of opportunities to really come alongside families and support them as they pass on the faith. Now, with the family pastor, there will still be positions underneath for children's ministry and for youth ministry. Those are not going away. But what we're hoping is to develop a strategy that really says, okay, from the time a child is born until they launch in young adulthood, what are we hoping that they will learn? How are we hoping that they'll develop in their faith? And to have that be a very cohesive strategy moving from one age group to another, but to have it be all under one umbrella. So where are we in the process? We have a search team. An email went out about that maybe a month ago. It's also on the website if you'd like to look at that. Danny Morgan is heading up the search team, and we are looking for candidates really for all three of those positions. Now, that certainly wasn't our goal at the beginning. That's not what we envisioned when we started this search at the beginning of the summer. Our thought was that we would just be looking for a family pastor. But then we've unfortunately lost Darlene and Colt, and so now we have 3 positions to fill. Ideally, we'd like to fill, yeah?
I just have a question. Could you please explain and introduce Danny Morgan to this group?
Sure. Danny Morgan is probably about my age. She's a pediatrician. She's been involved in the congregation for a very long time. She has 2 sons, Jack and Lucas. She has blonde hair, if that helps you. But she is on the web. I think maybe her picture is not up there, but certainly think she's in the directory if you want to look her up. And so she has been involved with her kids for a long time and is really doing a great job leading this team so far. So ideally, we would hire the family pastor first, but given our situation now where we have 3 openings, we're not clinging to the ideal. We're looking at all 3 of those positions at the same time and trying to find the right fit so that hopefully we can get those filled quickly, because it's a challenging season to have all those positions open. Okay, so I told you a little bit of some things that you probably knew were going on. Some things are a little bit more behind the scenes, super fun. So we've grown a lot, as I said, right? 200 members in the last 2 years. So in my opinion, in an organization, what's always last to catch up is policy and governance, right? Because you're blowing and going, and you've got to get that structure underneath of you to continue to be able to do well. So this year, we're working on financial policies and procedures. We're trying to get those updated and cleaned up a little bit to make sure that we're managing that process well, that the staff people who are involved in that have what they need to be able to do that well. We're also looking at memorial funds and how those are listed on our balance sheets and on our financial statements, and to make sure that we're using those well. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think when people give a donation in memorial of someone, they actually hope that it will be used for some good. And so what has happened is we have some funds who were given long time ago that are kind of just stuck. And so what we'll be doing is reaching out to people who have a connection there and trying to pool some of that into some meaningful projects instead of having them just sit on our finances. Giving projections over the next decade. This is my pet project, though I'm a little bit behind on it. So many people have expressed to me, and I certainly see the concern, that most of our giving here at Harvard Avenue comes from those who are, let's say, of the boomer generation, right? And the concern is, what does that mean in 10, 15 years? And so what we want to do is actually look at that a little more closely, not by name, but to be able to say, okay, we're afraid that 80% of our annual giving comes from those over 65. Is that true or is that not true? Is it only 60%? Is it 90%? Hopefully not. And so what we're going to do is be able to look at that and analyze that data in meaningful ways so that we're not just afraid of something that we think is a problem, but we actually know what that's going to look like. We're also working on personnel and compensation and bonus guidelines, cleaning some of that up, making sure that we're compensating our staff well, that we're able to offer them good benefits, and that it's more uniform across different staff people as opposed to just hodgepodge as each person comes on. That also bears weight into as we look to hire these new positions to make sure that we can offer a competitive package, but also have strong personnel policies that would be attractive for someone to come work for us. And then governance and bylaw changes. So our bylaws need to be reviewed. I don't think Steve is here, but Steve Ray always tells me that he thinks bylaws should be reviewed every single year, which is why he's on the bylaw team. So we are working on that. The goal was to actually do that this year because we've had so many unexpected changes in the last several months. That's been deferred to next year. But looking at our bylaws and making sure that our structure and the way that we communicate between different teams and different leadership areas is something that will support us and support our growth as we move forward. So you'll hear more about that probably in the first or second quarter of next year. Okay, vision update. So I wanted to kind of do a quick review on some vision and then tell you where we are because we are tracking some of this information. So I'm just going to read this, but this is from our vision document. At this moment, God has positioned us with people, resources, and passion to take our next steps to share the life and love we have found in Jesus with the world. We love our neighbors and want them to experience the ways that living and loving like Jesus makes life better. We believe there are thousands of people in our community waiting for someone to invite them to take their next step to follow Jesus. The Holy Spirit has gone before us to ready the hearts of people to hear the good news of Jesus, and God has called us to share the love of Jesus with them and invite them to take their next step in following him. Walking with Jesus is a lifelong journey, and we will be a church where everyone is always taking a next step in their faith. We will design Sunday morning experiences that are engaging, welcoming, and meaningful for people of all ages. We anticipate that in 5 years, 750 people will be attending our worship experience. Now, I want to stop and say a little bit about numbers here because it's easy to think that, okay, well, we're just focusing on the numbers just to say we're big or we're growing or whatever. But that's not what's behind this. What's behind this is that we think if we live out our mission to live and love like Jesus, if we continue to be a welcoming, wonderful place for people to find their spiritual home, that we expect that our worship attendance could double in the next 5 years. And if we don't think that way and start planning for that, we're going to be in a real pickle in 5 years with double the people and nothing ready for that. And so it's not about the numbers, it's about the vision of what we think God might be doing here, and how can we make sure that we're ready and prepared and strategic to meet that. We'll be a place where families flourish, so that has to do with that family pastor that I talked about. We want to meet people where they are, give them the tools and support for healthy families, strong marriages, and relationships, and faithful parenting. We want families to grow closer to God and one another as they live out their faith together in their daily lives, because life with Jesus is better. We know that especially now people are searching for connection. We will be the place where people can find the love of Jesus and the love of a community who cares about them. At the end of 5 years, we anticipate having 60 life groups meeting in locations all over our city. None of this vision will happen unless we invite others to share this hope that we found in Jesus. So we're going to be a church where everyone is equipped to go out and share their faith in their everyday lives. We love our city and believe we have been specifically called to share God's love here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Collectively, we will do 25,000 acts of kindness over the next 5 years to make our community a better place and to show God's love in action. I'm going to come back to that one. We've been blessed with abundant resources here at Harvard Avenue and have been a generous church throughout our history. As we look to the future, we want to do even more, and we will make a noticeable difference in Tulsa and around the world by giving $250,000 annually to support organizations and partners that help underserved populations. So that's just a recap of some of those vision things, and these are some of the things that we're tracking. We're tracking this because if you don't know how you're doing at something, it's like if you aim at nothing, you're going to hit nothing. So here's worship attendance. The first column, I'll use my pointer again. The first column here is what it was last year. So this is the end of 2022. This is what we kind of thought could be a goal for this year. And then the last column is what we hope, and the title's not there, what we anticipate it could be at the end of 5 years, so 2027. The yellow number here is what it actually is as of last week, as best as I know. So worship attendance, last year we were at 352. We're currently at about 415. New members, last year we had 106 new members. So far this year we've had 75 new members. Life groups, last year we had 14. This year we have 21. In terms of families flourishing, our goal this year was to initiate that strategy. And so what we've done is we've had some coaching. We have put together this job description of the family pastor, started that search, and then certainly now are also searching for those other 2 positions. So that's still in the development phase right now. Outreach. I hope you all saw the video that played last week I think in worship. If not, it was in the Tuesday email or recap to show all the ways that we are serving both with our time and giving our money. But if you haven't seen that, you definitely should. Last year we gave $168,000 in outreach. This year so far we've given $164. Our goal for this year was $180. I think we'll easily surpass that by the end of the year. This doesn't include yet Christmas Eve offerings and other end of the year gifts that I think will put us above 180. Okay, I'm gonna pause on that one. And then the last part is people trained to share their faith. We haven't moved on that, not because it's not important, it certainly is, but because we just can't do everything at once, so that's on pause for this year. So I want to give you a little preview of what to expect, what's coming up next. So of course, we need a budget for next year. In 2 weeks, we start our initial budget meetings to start looking at that. And then our congregational meeting, which is usually the last week, second to last or last week in January, is where we approve that budget. And so you will be looking for that, and we'll send that out ahead of time. We want to continue to develop our personnel policies and our rhythms to make sure that this continues to be a good place to work. We want to complete that interior and exterior signage that I mentioned before. I hope we're going to update the bylaws. And then ultimately down the path, we talked about being a church where everyone's taking their next steps. So we want to really make that clear, especially for people who are new to the faith. What does a next step look like? If I'm just walking in here for the first time, what might my first step be? What might my next step be? And so ultimately, we hope to develop what we're calling a discipleship path, which really kind of helps people to know, okay, if I'm here, how can I grow closer to God? What are some things that I can do to take that next step? And then we'll continue to make family ministries a priority as we continue that search process and hopefully find people for those positions next year. The next congregational meeting is at the Thanksgiving dinner. That was also in the email that went out this week, so I hope you'll be there for that. At that meeting, we will elect new people on the ministry leadership team, new deacons, new elders, and so we'll be sending out information shortly about who those people are. If you don't know, that we have a nominating team that's put together every year at the beginning of the fall, and they work hard to identify people who could fill those different roles and ask them and invite them to serve. And so once that's finalized, which it almost is, we'll send that out so you'll know ahead of time. But that's part of what we do at that Thanksgiving dinner. Okay, now I want to open it up for questions. And I know we covered a lot of ground, so hopefully you were able to remember your questions. But yeah, Cheryl or Star, you're both raising your hands. Sure.
Okay, Diana, do you think that we would have more young people attending church if it wasn't for youth sports?
No.
Diana, can you repeat that question?
Yeah, the question was, do you think we'd have more people attending church if it wasn't for youth sports? And I'm going to say no, and here's why. I have kids who are involved in sports. Now, do we miss sometimes? Yes, my daughter's going to have a competition next Sunday. We're going to miss next Sunday. Ultimately, everyone has to prioritize what's most important for their family. And I think that overall, while there are certain instances where you have to miss because of youth sports, I think overall, if your relationship with Jesus is central and you want to pass that on to your children, and that's a primary goal of raising your children, you're going to figure out a way to have them here at church. So I think it's actually a little bit more, and I want to walk this carefully because I have lots of good friends who are missing church because of youth sports. And I don't want to throw them under the bus in any way. But ultimately, it comes down to priorities, and I think that we did a poor job discipling my generation so that they could think that their kids learning how to play sports is just as important as coming to know Jesus. And that's probably an unpopular opinion, but there you have it. Yeah, Cheryl.
You talk about the new family focus and the new people that you're recruiting. Where are they addressing the issue of how do we get the 20-somethings, the ones that, there's a gap, it's the kids that stay at home, that are still at home versus the ones that are out starting their new careers, and how are we addressing getting them involved?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would call those like the young adults, right? Those who have graduated from high school, usually before they're married, before they've started a family. That's a challenge throughout all churches. It's very hard to pinpoint a church who has a strong young adult program, truly between like 19 and 25-year-olds. There are some churches even in Tulsa who are doing well at 28, 29-year-olds. I think for us, the primary strategy has got to be able to get this family pastor and the children and youth people in place first, and then we hope to be able to expand to that young adult. But it's challenging because they're also in so many different life stages. Some are maybe still living at home, some have launched their career, some are married or thinking about getting married. So you're just at this time where there's so much transition in their lives. And not that we shouldn't be there to support them, certainly we should, but it's a difficult group to find success with, and I think we see that across everywhere. But my hope is that once we get some of those other positions in place, we could turn our attention to what we could do to include those young adults in a more meaningful way.
Trunk and treat thing was a huge success, and we must have had 150 kids. Everybody dressed up, it was fun. Whoever planned that did a great job. But my question is, we had a very diverse group of children. We had blacks, we had Hispanic, we had Asian. They all seemed very comfortable in the trunk or treat deal. How do we make those diverse populations comfortable at our church or at our Sunday school?
That's also a very good question and a difficult one. I mean, I'm sure you've heard it before that Sunday morning is the most segregated hour that there is, and I think there's so many reasons for that. I think part of that has to maybe do with staffing. I think you see churches who are seeing a very diverse congregation have also staffed in that way, so that they have staff people who are representing lots of different backgrounds. Part of it is location. I think that is a challenge too. It's a little bit different to just come for an event than it is to come, every Sunday morning to a place, but I think it's certainly something that we want to look at and determine, how we can move in that direction. But I think a lot of it has to do with how you staff and the ways you structure your programming that support families who maybe have some different needs than the families we often see here.
Is there a possibility that some of the staffing we're going to do, these three positions, could be some diversity in that arena?
Yes, and the pool we're choosing from is very small, and so I can't promise that, but it would be great if that were the case. Yeah.
Has any consideration been given to offering, say, a Saturday night at 5 o'clock service
Yes.
for families? And some churches even offer a service in Spanish at that hour to be more inclusive. And they have a part-time pastor come in specifically to provide that inclusive service.
Yes, they have given consideration to an evening service either Saturday night or Sunday night. It's very hard to point to evening services at churches our size that are doing well. And the reason is that often people will use that evening service as a replacement for the Sunday morning. So if they have to miss Sunday, they're going to show up on Saturday. But it's hard to seed that service with enough people who are going to commit that this is my service, and they're going to be here every single week and never, almost never miss to be able to make that successful. I know David and I have talked about that quite a bit. He's done Saturday night services before without any success. I think it's still a possibility, but I think it's a challenge, and I think even for young families who that seems attractive to, because in some ways it does seem attractive to me too to have that, it still would probably be easily moved for us because there's so many things going on Saturdays that would get in the way for that. It's not off the table, it's still being considered, but it's a challenge to do that, and to do that in a way that sets you up for appropriate hospitality and growth, because you don't want new people to show up to a service with 6 people scattered around the sanctuary. That's not welcoming, but you just, it could, you're right.
If the goals of attendance and membership are reached, do the facilities, are they able to accommodate that, specifically the sanctuary?
Yeah, that's a great question, one that's at the top of our consideration right now. So I think we have some options. There is, the way the sanctuary was built, as I understand it, it can be expanded, which is on the table. We have this space when you guys are not in here to do something. There's been discussion of doing a more contemporary service in the Family Life Center and kind of reorienting that a little bit to make it set up for something. So I think there's a lot of options. One of them is certainly expanding the sanctuary. That's not at the top of my priority, just because that's such a enormous expense and displaces a lot of people in the meantime, but we may get there. Part of what we also are considering is some kind of master site plan for this location, which is how much could we build out on this particular footprint? How could we maximize our space in different ways than what we're doing now? So that's kind of on the radar, maybe for next year or early in the following year, is to look at that and kind of understand what would be the maximum number of people that we could fit here at 55th and Harvard comfortably.
Okay, you went through the family minister, their goals and their job.
Mm-hmm.
How do they specifically do that? I mean, what do they physically do? Do they have meetings with families? Do they have to get the families to come in?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. So they will be supervising the staff people underneath them as part of their job, but then a lot of it is going to be changing the way that we deliver programming, in my opinion. So it's much harder to get families to show up here for programming, and this is shocking to me because it's actually not in my pocket. I normally have my phone right here in my pocket. And I think we have to think about how do we communicate and equip parents without requiring them to drag their whole family here for everything we offer. But how do we send them content? How do we do discipleship in digital ways? How do we communicate with them in kind of their native arena, right? Because that's where I get everything. I get information from my kids' teachers on my phone. I read the news on my phone. I do it all there. And so how do we plug into what they're already doing and come alongside them with information? So I think it really is, it's not only a paradigm shift of how we structure, but of how we communicate to those families and how we come alongside them in new ways. Because families are really busy, and to ask them to give 2 hours here and another 2 hours here and another 2 hours here is going to be really difficult. And so it's a matter of maybe having a little bit more of that one-on-one relationship, like you said, of being a person that families can go to have individual meetings or conversations, but also pushing out a little bit more of our programming into their homes and into their own conversations and into their worlds, as opposed to making it all be about driving to the church with all your kids in tow. I have 5 extra minutes. Yep.
What in the bylaws seem to be what need to be updated?
Yeah, so primarily, the question was about bylaws, what needs to be updated in the bylaws. Primarily, it has to do with the board, actually. So what the previous bylaws did was they created a board that had different department heads, as Hank said, right? those departments have changed. There are some that we don't have, there are some that have split into two, there are some that we don't need anymore, but we actually need these. And so it's a matter of developing a board that actually functions well as a board that provides oversight. I would also say that the speed at which our culture moves requires us to interact a lot more than every 8 weeks. And so the board meetings used to be, that was the time where you brought your committee information and you shared it and everybody talked about it and came up with how you can work together. That is happening outside those meetings because we have to move faster than that. And so really it's looking at the board as how does the board provide oversight for the whole church and the vision, not just reporting up from their committees, but how do they really provide a bigger picture. And so it's a matter of restructuring some of those roles in ways that fit our situation now, but also prepare us for growth in the future and have it be less tied to the departments that were set up when those bylaws were put in place. A little more flexibility to continue to have a board and not have positions that don't have a role connected to them anymore. Did I answer your question?
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you guys.